the United States and the United Kingdom that have started the D-Day on the 6th of June 1944. This offensive in Belarus forced the German high command to redeploy huge contingents to the east, bearing in mind that 70% of all forces of the Wehrmacht, up to 145 divisions, continue to fight at the Soviet front. And in his letter to Joseph Stalin of 27 September 1944, Winston Churchill mentioned that it was the Russian army who had gutted the German war machine and was occupying the most part of the enemy's forces. When Rishi Sunak and his policy considered it possible to celebrate the Day of Europe, Day of Liberation of Europe from the Hitler's forces in the European continent, its western part, and decided not to invite Russian representatives to the event, when this happened, they lost not only the conscience, not only the conscientiousness regarding our efforts, the sacrifice our fighters made, and the United Kingdom perhaps stopped respecting even Churchill. And while liberating Belarus, Soviet warriors of all nationalities manifested impressive heroism and battle mastery. 1,500 participants of the operation became heroes of the Soviet Union, and hundreds of thousands were awarded medals. Now on the June 22nd, you know, this is a remarkable date in the history of our countries. In our tradition, it's called the Day of Remembrance and Sorrow. The treacherous attack of the fascist Germany and satellites against the Soviet Union is still resonates with grief, pain, and resentments for the crippled destinies of millions of people. And as usual, as ever, after conquering Europe, which submitted without fighting, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and this war lasted for 1,418 days and claimed more than 27 million lives of Soviet citizens. And the Soviet Union took the brunt of the strike of the Hitlerite Germany. It managed to break the back of Nazi movement and liberate the peoples of Europe from occupation. More than 75% of all losses and casualties of forces of fascist Germany and the Wehrmacht have been lost on the Eastern Front. We remember on June 22nd all those tortured in fascist captivity, those who died on the backlines in the occupied territories from hunger and hardships. We mourn for those who sacrificed their life to protect the motherland. The victory in the Great Patriotic War has always been a source of pride for us, because this has always been a time of the greats, of titans. Those people who defended freedom and the independence of our motherland were heroes, even if they don't call it themselves such. After the victory, it seemed that Nazism as ideology was defeated, was crushed utterly, and would not be able to raise its head again, and that the countries that birthed it will learn a terrible lesson forever. And those who felt the impact of fascism will never forget this. But the ideas of supremacy, exclusivity, and xenophobia have been resilient and have taken roots in the minds of Western elites to become an instrument, once again, of their Russophobic policy. It has been just muted for a time. They made it a taboo. But year after year, they were engaged in rewriting the history of the Second World War. They even tried to rewrite the history of the Great Patriotic War. The West consistently was forgetting about the decisive contribution made to the Germany's defeat. And after those blasphemous statements of the leaders of the Western countries who have appropriated victory in the Second World War, the result of this We see at the example of those who don't remember their past, their ancestors, the very people who have ruptured the links with their forefathers by demolishing monuments dedicated to them. Those memorials have been struck down by the very people that issued from those people. In Ukraine, they have recreated Nazism based on the support of Nazi and fascist criminals who were pardoned by the Western elites, and they preserved their deals were preserved for the future as stocks, as stockpiles. The historical disgrace of the West, those people that they preserved led prosperous lives, and they were respectable. They were entertained by the elites of the Western countries as if they tried to wash away the stigma of being Nazi henchmen. But you cannot wash away the stigma, because Nazism is not only an external manifestation. We see it we can see it just to point the source of the threat, but Nazism is deeply inside of them. This is something that lodged itself into the brain. This is something that this dehumanizing pandemic, which has no cure other than the knowledge of history, the self-reflection work, the separation of evil and good from each other, and the preservation of historical memory. Not even 80 years later, the Anglo-Saxons tried to use Nazism as a ram to defeat Russia. But now this role is given to the Kiev regime. After the beginning of the special military operation, the collective West instantly started the campaign to cancel the Russian culture, the Russian sports, literature, and in general, the Russian people.
It introduced tens of thousands of legitimate measures against us in the economic sector as well. They understood who elaborated all of this. They imposed this sanction against people who work, who every day do their professional duty. They knew that they imposed this sanction not only against Russia people, but against people all over the world, because this affects all the corners of the world. But they think they can do this because they're exceptional. They are this garden that can do anything, this golden billion. At the same time, they wage war on the monuments to those who liberated Europe, the monuments to the heroes of the Great Patriotic War being demolished, to the warriors who liberated Europe. And I'm not speaking about only the military monuments, but also to the Russian classics. They are trying to finally bulldoze through the historical memory of nations. The coup d'etat in Ukraine 2014 showed that the collective West does everything to turn Ukraine into anti-Russia, to revive the ideas of Nazism, neo-Nazism, nationalism, glorifying the henchmen of Hitler, Bandera and Shukhevich, having torch marches, canceling Russian language, which most of the Ukrainian citizens speak and think in. In practice, we see the Nazi Germany of 1930s, the oppression and sometimes medieval harassment. We could just remember the mass burning of people in trade union house in Odessa in May 2014. We can remember persecution of those and harassment, abuse against those who were held captive. Just remember what was said by President Poroshenko, that those who didn't swear allegiance to these ideas will always below the ground, and all the others will have all the benefits. So this medieval abuse is what Russian-speaking people in Ukraine face. Without any trial, dissidents are being persecuted, abused against. People are being dragged to military offices, to inscription offices. They do everything for this ideology to keep existing. First, they reached those who were speaking Russian, and now they put on this altar of neo-Nazism the lives of the civilians, of the citizens of Ukraine, even those who swore allegiance to this neo-Nazism. And we spoke about this. We spoke about this for many years. Nationalism, neo-Nazism, fascism are the evils that afterwards consume those who created them, because they always need blood and victims, regardless of the initial causes or initial objectives. Let's see what is happening to the political opposition of the Kiev regime, what happens to the persecution of the canonical or Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They tried to exterminate the residents of Donbass. Ukrainian Nazism was nurtured from the outside. It was armed from the outside by the collective West that is a proxy party to the conflict in Ukraine. Being the heirs of the generation of the great victor, we do not have the moral right to see the return of the Nazi ideology. We remember the terrors of Nazism. We remember the efforts that were needed to defeat it, and the work that was not done properly by the West to eradicate Nazism now yields its terrible results. We honor the memory of our fathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandfathers that died in the Great Patriotic War. We will always remember the heroism of those who were not on the front but on the back lines. They sacrificed not only their lives but their health in order to reach the victory together with the front. In the context of the special military operation, our military continues to fight for the just cause, fighting against this Nazi hydra. We thank all those victors who gave us future and life and peace. Eternal glory to those who fell for the freedom and independence of our motherland. Eternal memory to them. And I'm ready to answer your questions. International Life, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zaharova. You spoke about Jens Stoltenberg today. I would like to point out the next thing. The countries of the alliance started consultations on having nuclear weapons in readiness. How could you comment on that? You know, this is a very interesting story because, first of all, we heard the statements, some kind of. Then it was published on the Telegraph, and Stoltenberg was the one who gave the interview, and then it was disavowed by the official representatives of the NATO. I think journalists have to find out if he said it or no. And now let's return to the question, to the essence of the question. Well, it's very important to say, if we're speaking about the British journalists spreading fakes, they started blaming Russia for propaganda. This is just surprising. Maybe this is the mistake of the British journalists. We remember how they tried to incriminate the British establishment. For instance, it was Reiter. They said that the British leaders didn't say what this media said. But after several hours, the journalists of Reuters supported their version of the events. But Telegraph couldn't do that. That is why They decided to relate all of this to Russian propaganda, but Russia has nothing to do with that. Telegraph and Stoltenberg should figure out themselves if he said it or not. So they just used well-used anti-Russian templates, not even seeing global communication problems that they have. As for the question itself, if we're not speaking about the readiness of the weapons that are provided for joint nuclear missions of NATO, this destabilizing practice continues to be a very serious problem for security on the continent. It is mentioned these missions are based on the deployment of the US of its nuclear weapons in Europe. This is located 2,000 kilometers away from the national territory of the US, and it can reach the territory of Russia. Our demands include the withdrawal from Europe of all the American nuclear weapons and all the infrastructure that could be used for its deployment. Thank you very much. Another question. The other day, the representative of the OSCE on the freedom of the media, at the end of his mandate, accused Russia of the catastrophic situation of the media in our country, and he was speaking about security on all the space of the OSCE. What can you say about that? You know, it's very interesting when when the mandate ends, people stop working somewhere. It is not what happens. You said very correctly. Ribeiro was not speaking about the end of work, but about the end of mandate. Maybe before it was the same in the OSCE, but now it is not like that. Her mandate ended, but her work didn't. This is the shame of the Portuguese diplomacy. She was presented as a great professional when was nominated for this post. She was presented to the countries that were supposed to support her nomination to this post, but in fact she didn't do anything, and it costed a lot. Through all this time, which she was not doing anything, she was not working. There isn't any word to call this type of activity. So this, in one of the most terrible examples of the biasness of this organization, of the work of this person as the representatives of the OSCE for freedom of journalism. Remember how people who had this post in the OSCE truly used their professionalism and their personal characteristics to counter the terrible trends of destructive influence of one country against their work. They had some kind of balance. They used their professional capabilities to implement the mandate that they have. But Ribeiro didn't even try to do that. She personally participated in the segregation of the journalist community, in separating journalists for bad and good ones. In the recent years, we haven't seen anything but biased statements from Teresa Ribeiro that has nothing to do with the mandate she has. She ignored the persecution and abuse against Russian correspondents. The terrorist attacks of Ukrainian forces against Russian correspondents raises a lot of questions, not only about her professional capabilities. We have evaluated her because she doesn't have them. It raises a lot of questions about her human characteristics. So she failed in her mandate it resulted in the collapse and degradation of this mandate. This is not crisis, this is dysfunction. Media issues are the most politicized in this structure. If we're speaking about the security of journalists in OSCE, we need to ask them. And this structure has to explain to the members why it kept silence when there were terrorist attacks against journalists, against Daria Dugina, Vladlen Tatarsky, Mr. Kokov, Vladislav Zhuravlov, Mr. Maksudov, Mr. Yeremin, Mr. Kozhin, Nikita Tsitsagi. There wasn't any condemnation, any formal condemnation against those who did it. I'm not speaking about giving facts. They didn't even say anything. She just heartless person who doesn't do anything. There are a lot of restrictions of the OSCE against Russian media. They deliberately ignore the rights of Russian journalists that do not work according to the Western norms. They push away Russian media from their OSCE space. She ignored everything. This balance between the work of the office and the organization itself means the degradation in the access to the information in the OSCE countries, and it is a detonator which many people are discussing, which will result in the collapse of all the structure. She contributed personally to it. The main result for us of the quasi-work of this person means that this institute was usurped. In fact, it was maximally politicized. That is why it is necessary to reform it deeply. We need to reform it, restructure it, somehow change it. The main thing, the principles of this, the work of this institute should be new, because we can face this situation when the representative of this institute does not help to solve problems, but creates problems and the violations. But we need to understand that if the OSCE is capable of reforming itself, not the opportunity, but the capability. A great cluster, the block of its work is being usurped. So the question is how it can implement changes to become more effective. RIA Novosti, are you here? Hello. We're here. We have one question. On the 13th of June, the US, Canada, and the UK issued a joint statement where they accused Russia of undermining democratic process of Moldavia, inciting protests, using criminal groups, corruption schemes, and disinformation. At the same time, they declared support to Maya Sandu in the fighting against Russian destabilization just before presidential election and referendum on Euro integration. How would you comment on the situation in Moldavia? Well, you have two questions. Well, this is just part of one question. They are in the same context. Yes, I understand. I think that this is another fake or another attempt to support Sandu regime anyway by the West. But, you know, they paid her directly and she has Romanian citizenship. And she supports all the Western narratives. That is why the citizens of Moldavia feel more and more the results of the Sandu activity, the administration of Sandu. We're speaking about the survival of the people, the culture of Moldavia. So she needed some kind of support from the outside. That is why three countries decided to do that. And the essence of the statement is like presenting everything like it is not as it is in reality. So in fact, we hear some accusations, baseless accusations against our country. Even, for instance, we are to blame in the problems of Moldavia, as they say. This is an attempt of somehow to blow the process of turning of the republic under the administration of Sandu, that is supported by the West, in making Moldavia a dictatorship, in order to protect the country of the so-called enemies of democracy. And this is done because her rating, her popularity rating is very low. Well, I think that we should base on the evaluation of this statement by independent Moldavian experts, but they didn't have any unanimity in their evaluations. Some say that it is an intervention into the internal affairs of Moldavia, that it is being governed from the outside. But this is something classic. The Westerners do this to support each other during election processes, literally saying that they have some preferences about the candidates in some other countries. Remember presidential elections where there were different opponents, for instance, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the US. And other members of NATO said that they had some obvious preferences. These were the words of the leaders of states, and they made statements. There were interviews and comments. I'm not even remembering that. There was thousands of words that were said. They directly used their official post, being the leaders of different countries, intervening into the election process in the US itself, speaking about their preferences, saying that Hillary Clinton is the best candidate for them. I will never forget the journals, the papers, U.S. papers that were supposed to be published with the photo of the future president. Even before the election, everything was prepared, but some leaders, like Hollande, for instance, even sent their words of congratulations to her. This is the values of the Western world, but in fact they're anti-values. We're speaking about non-interference, and they interfere into internal affairs of other states. They form electoral preferences from the outside for sovereign states. They speak about pluralism, the freedom of speech, but at the same time they do everything for the Moldavian forces to keep closing all the media that are not mainstream.
What else? They speak of cultural identity, independence as part of human rights aspect, formulating it as minorities' rights. They applaud it when Madam Santos speaks that there is no Moldovan language, no Moldovan identity. They are all Romanians by nationality, and there are a lot of examples of this. Economy, there's nothing to talk about. Where is this touted liberalism? We see that the example of the Madam Santos government, nothing. We see nothing of that. We see corruption-like management in the interest of Western corporations and not in the interest of their own people. In general, we closely monitor the situation in Moldova. We clearly understand that beside the thing that we mentioned today, regarding the revisionism and the neoliberal values used as pretexts to destroy the traditions and morality and national Moldovan identity. This is the 80th anniversary this year of Moldova's liberation from the German and Romanian occupation forces, and official Chisinau is still trying to whitewash Hitlerites and Hitler's henchmen. This is just puzzling because Madame Sandu made her choice to whitewash the collaborators. On June 13th, there was a ceremony of commemoration of Romanian soldiers, and I quote the statement of those who remember them. Those soldiers sacrificed their lives to liberate Bessarabia in summer 1941. And in Faleshti town, there was a commemorative action to commemorate Romanian heroes who died during the Second World War. What Romanian heroes they're talking about? Perhaps Romanian partisans? No, the Romanian collaborators. On the eve of those blasphemous demarches, the authorities made some statements regarding the anniversary of the 1941 deportations, using this difficult chapter in the history to denigrate the period of Moldova's stay as part of the USSR. And the authorities of Moldova also tried to propagate the European project to turn this republic, as they say, as into a space of freedom, peace, prosperity, and confidence in tomorrow's day. But they need just to reject the fact that they are Moldovans, to inscribe themselves as Romanians, and voila, everything will turn out as they desire. That's the project of Madame Sandu. The true delights of the European future were demonstrated to the residents of Moldova during the LGBT parade, which happened in Chisinau on 16th of June. This parade was called the Pride March. Perhaps, that's the sort of pride they deserve. Under the reinforced police escorts, the representative of Western diplomatic representations and missions took part in this event, and the congregation was bolstered by the tourists from the Western countries. Everyone has their own perceptions on life and how to do things in their life, and we mentioned this today. But regarding pride, there's nothing to be proud about. Not to say about walking in the street without underwear, swinging it in the air. But there were no Moldovans ready to do this, so they had to ensure their representatives by attracting Western participants. Perhaps for the Western diplomats, perhaps it's a mandatory events, or they are doing this for the leisure. They walk in those LGBT parades in the country of their stay. I don't know. If you think about it, this is completely nonsensical. And the Moldovan residents preferred to attend the events of 15th, 16th June, events that were proclaimed in favor of the protection of traditional family values. According to surveys, around 85% of Moldovan citizens are against same-sex marriages, and they hope to protect traditional morals and values. They don't need to think about those new normals and preserve the normal situation that used to exist, like tradition. And we see, according to the media reports, that some traditionalists were arrested during the manifestations. But when we look at pride parades, pride marches, LGBT parades, they are allowed to walk in the center of the city. But if you protect the traditional values, you can be arrested. One more manifestation of this pseudo-democracy on behalf of Madame Sandu's regime was the suspension of the head of the famous dance ensemble of Moldova called JOK for the participation in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And if I mentioned this, if I didn't mention it, you wouldn't believe it. Some of the dancers of this ensemble took part in the cultural program of the Moldovan Garden as part of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Just so you know where you can dance and where you can't, actually, because they were suspended after returning home. This is just a disgrace. This is everything that I'm talking about. They are confirmations of information where Moldovan residents return to airports of their own countries. They are being persecuted. The common sense is completely twisted. We see an amoral policy in regards to Moldovan residents with the Maia Sandu's regime, where people are being detained upon arrival, being interrogated. Their passports are being torn up. And the result of this policy course of Chisinau is a catastrophic demographic situation in the country. According to official data, in 2023, the population decreased by 69,000 people, and during the 3 years of Maia Sandu's presidency, it decreased by 203,000 people, by 8%. This is a country that is not experiencing any attack on the part of international terrorist organizations or is not engaged in any combat protecting its borders. No, it's just a normal situation. It's just the result of the values that people are fleeing from. A number of newborns has decreased by 11% throughout the last year because the current authorities have not created a good environment for the growing generation. The absolute poverty, abject poverty among children exceeded 30% in the rural areas. In rural areas, we see this number at 44.6%. I see how the majority of Moldovans, we see it in social surveys or while talking to the citizens. We have weekly forums and events where the residents are present, or perhaps meeting them in the street. I see how they understand everything that's going on, but they're trying to resist it too. They understand that their interests have been infringed upon, that they are being teased, that this Madam Sandu's policy is akin to genocide. They are thinking not only about themselves, they're thinking about future generations of Moldovans, because they understand that the current policy of Madam Sandu can lead the country to a true disintegration, to fall into the abyss. I'm convinced that all the attempts to subsume the national identity and rich history and tradition of the Moldovan people by those pseudo-European values are doomed to fail. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, good afternoon. What do you think is the reasoning behind the revocation of signatures behind the communique of the peace summits that happened in the recent weekend in Switzerland? I mean, the representative of Iraq, Jordan, and Rwanda. Was this the result of the Russian diplomatic actions? I will remind you about the numbers. We gave a profound commentary on June 17th, but I would like to remind you once again that the final communique with the anti-Russian, obviously anti-Russian character, was signed by not every country that attended the conference. First, 12 delegations, then 14 delegations refused the signature, among them India, Indonesia, Jordan, Iraq, Mexico, the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, Thailand, the South African Republic, and other prominent states. We don't preclude the possibility of those countries, or number of those countries increasing. It's obvious that the world majority sees this initiative not as a recipe to ending warfare. They see the true desire of the Western countries that is to push through the agenda intended not to reach peace, but to continue the warfare. They don't want to follow this dangerous ideology, this dangerous course. I think that the world will continue to realize and be reinforcing the realization that the real way towards peace is the cessation of any arms shipments and the things that were mentioned in the statement of President Putin, who declared his proposition during his statement in the MFA building on June 14th. The very program, the proposition, this ideological peace that could become the coveted way to reach peace. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. The questions that we wanted to ask you, you already partially answered it regarding the EU's plans to use proceeds from Russian frozen assets to give Ukraine $50 billion of aid. Russia has repeatedly called this blatant thievery. However, when will Russia give a response to such actions? And perhaps you could, at least generally, shed the light on the details regarding the specifics of this answer. We mentioned that our country has a significant volume of Western assets, both property situated in Russian jurisdiction. Everything can be subject to the response policy of the Russian Federation, and the character of these actions will not be revealed to you by anyone. The arsenal of political and economic countermeasures is quite broad, and once again, I will not tell you directly the exact countries, but you can clearly see for yourself that there's just 7 of them in the G7. We received some info from their, not just from envoys and messengers, but we received direct signals from the capitals that they have nothing to do with such decisions of the G7. They will not do it just because they understand that the expenses borne due to such actions will be, softly speaking, quite damaging for them. This is not accidental. We understand that. Those things are put in motion. We understand we can't really put a stop to this. If you don't have any questions, we go further. Is news.ru with us? Yes, good afternoon, the news.ru. Madam Zakharova, thank you very much for remembering our colleague Nikita Tsegage. Rest in peace. I will just my condolences to his family. I just wanted to say a little something. Let's do it. You can see that we appeal to UNESCO even. I'm not even talking about the OSCE because there's no one to talk to in there. Don't you want to use our capabilities, our diplomatic channels, to send everything you need to UNESCO directly in regards to the loss that you've suffered as a collective? It will be a pleasure to do this because, once again, we do our own work. We have our own work cut out for us in the nearest future. There will be confirmations for that. But we, with pleasure, will use your position as a media outlet, if you have it. Perhaps the very scope of this tragedy is understandable, and the situation of the close relatives is understandable, but perhaps they could find enough strength to address some words, make a statement to the organization that has its calling in protecting journalists, but unfortunately is not currently engaged in that. Yes, we will think about it, because you understand, the thing is, I don't really believe the thing, but perhaps the official statements that we are making, perhaps they will not affect international functionaries, but perhaps something will stir inside them if they hear the words or will read the words from the colleagues of the deceased, for who, if not for our identity, our status as members of one culture tradition, they wouldn't be able to hear. So if you have the opportunity to give a communique perhaps that we could transfer this to UNESCO, yes, we will take into account. We will return to you with, we'll get back to you with information. Our first question relates to the military technical cooperation between Yerevan and Paris. They've concluded an agreement to supply the self-propelled artillery pieces called Caesar to Armenia. What could be the consequences of that deal? We see that Paris is provoking another stage of this increase of tensions. We've already mentioned this. We see another confirmation of this. The authorities in France is interested not in the best for Armenia, or not even in the interest of a singular people. Paris desires to use the current disagreements between countries or inside countries as an instrument to reach their own political goals. And by those political goals, I mean not only the personal interests of the Elysian Palace, but as France, as a herald of NATO policy. Perhaps that's the way we should treat it. Thank you very much. For second question, Hürriyet, the Turkish media outlets said that they helped prevent a second terrorist attack in Moscow besides Crocus City whole disaster. Is there any truth behind this information? Such things pertain to the competence of special services, all competent authorities. They give commentators considering the sensibility, the vulnerability, and the sensitivity of this topic. And I think this field is left for specialists to respond to. I can only say that we maintain contacts on all levels with our Turkish colleagues. We discuss all the questions on the agenda. Thank you very much. Is Verelk with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions today. The first question concerns the fact that lawyers of Ruben Vardanyan said that he was subjected to torture in Azerbaijan's captivity. What is the reaction of Russia regarding this illegal detainment of Mr. Vardanyan, the former minister in Artsakh? Is this question of his liberation raised during the meeting between Russia and Azerbaijan? I would like to answer with a question. Perhaps you didn't see it. The issue of Ruben Vardanyan's current whereabouts. Ruben Vardanyan is not currently a citizen of the Russian Federation. Whether he is currently in prison during the Azerbaijan. Is this question raised in Armenian and Azerbaijani context? Perhaps this question is worked out during those consultations. If you could return to me with the answer, this would be interesting to me, because I would like to remind you that Ruben Vardanyan left the Russian citizenship. It's not a secret. This is not some unchecked info. I think that such questions should be addressed to Baku and Yerevan.
I understand why you're asking this question. You related to the regional situation. I'll remind that Russia is in favor of comprehensive Armenian-Azerbaijan normalization in the context of trilateral agreements at the highest level of 2020-2022. This process also includes the solution of humanitarian issues like the return and exchange of all the people that are being retained, also the treating of cultural and historical monuments, memorials, exchange of information about the search of people that gone missing, and we regularly provide the signals to the both parties. And the second question. Yesterday, Mikhail Galuzin, in the interview to Komsomolskaya Pravda, said that the transition of Armenia under the umbrella of the US and NATO will be impossible to preserve the unique defense area of the Russian Federation in the context of CSTO. And there was information in the Telegram channels that Russia could reject any negotiations with Armenia on the provision of weapons and military equipment, responding to this policy of Yerevan. Is this true? Will Moscow review its relations with Armenia if we're speaking about military and political and economic aspect? You're speaking about the interview of the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mikhail Galuzin. It was published by Komsomolskaya Pravda. This is true. I can confirm that. All the evaluations were given there. As for the information about the provision of the military products, you should go to the Ministry of Defense and the Federal Service on Military and Technical Cooperation. As for the military products that are being provided to foreign countries, they're being implemented according to the demands of the necessities of the special military operation, and we have repeatedly spoken about that. There are some types of weapons and military equipment that are related to military technical cooperation, not only with Armenia, but also to other partners. As for the contacts with Armenia and military and technical sphere, we do not reject them. We regularly have them, and we didn't have any claims from the other side. Big Asia, are you here? Yes, Ms. Zaharov, we are here on the 10th of June on Seoul. There was the third meeting of the American-South Korean Consultative Group on Nuclear Issues. That after that, South Korean media said that the representatives of two countries finalized the consideration of the actions for a possible nuclear attack from the DPRK. They discussed joint planning and implementation of nuclear deterrence, integration of nuclear weapons of the US and South Korea. The ambassador of Russia in South Korea, Georgy Zinoviev, signalized that Japan shows great interest to the work of this consultative group on nuclear issues, and it also interested in deploying nuclear US weapons on its territory. This information means that the scale of aggressiveness of the US policy in Asia-Pacific is growing, and is it justified to link such signals from Seoul and Tokyo to the intention of the Americans to keep raising tensions in the confrontation with China? Well, in your question, I would just leave question marks or everything you said and would make it a confirmation. And that would be my answer, but I cannot do that. That is why I can say that these meetings of this American-South Korean Consultative Group on Nuclear Issues held in Seoul on the 10th of June. This is another proof of the aggressive policy of Washington on the Korean Peninsula. All of this provokes further escalation of tensions, undermines peace and stability. The running in of scenarios of hypothetical armed conflict with the use of nuclear weapons pushes these sub-regions to the verge of a nuclear disaster. Is this intentional? Yes, it is. This is their dream. They're dreaming about this. They could undermine everything. They could destabilize completely another region, turn Korean Peninsula to Middle East #2. That would be great for them. Why? Because they could be new. That would provide new contracts for military industry of the U.S. It would be another opportunity to show to their own citizens their own exceptionalism and how they can, to show them how they can work inside this chaos, so they could raise the stakes at international affairs. These are their favorite methods that they could use in this scenario. But at the same time, they could create a headache for other countries in the region. They could, create another front. If during the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War, the Second Front was something useful, something correct, something long-awaited in the fight against fascism of our country. In this case, we're speaking about a new front of the collective West. This is completely the opposite. This is another front line organized by the collective West in order to put the planet, introduce planet, like drag the planet into another confrontation. And we're not only about speaking the problems and related to DPRK, also to deterrence of China and Russia. They're speaking about the threats of China, but who created the threats? DPRK was retaliating the threats created against its own country. We're following the intensifying of military and political cooperation of Japan with the US and regional allies in Asia and Asia-Pacific region. This is part of their double deterrence policy against Russia and China. Tokyo and Japan for the US is another instrument of fighting not only against our country, but first of all against China. And the US sees like this many other countries, for instance, Ukraine. But the question is if Japan wants the same destiny as Ukraine. Japan is being used to destabilize the situation in the Asian Pacific. They had great opportunity. We had great opportunities for cooperation with Japan, with the people of Japan. There would be many economic benefits, great opportunities for exploring the resources of this region. There could be many interesting projects in business, economy, finance. We could respond to the common challenges, if we're speaking about natural disasters and other things. But all of this was trampled by the U.S. hegemonism that thinks that the countries are its vassals or its instruments. We have repeatedly pointed out the threat for the region of the course of the administration of Fumio Kishida administration course for accelerated remilitarization of Japan, including consecutive steps to dismantle pacifist restrictions of the post-war constitution to create the offensive potential of the country. We're also concerned of the plans of Tokyo to blur the national nuclear-free status in the format of participating in the joint nuclear missions of the U.S. together with NATO countries, having multilateral exercises with the use of strategic bombardments that are certified to implement nuclear tasks. At the same time, there are prospects of deployment of American medium-range missiles on Japanese islands. This would create potential threats to the Far East of the Russian Federation, and this would mean adequate retaliatory measures from our side to support the defense of our country. The President spoke about this the last Friday on the 14th of June of the 2024. He spoke about this, saying that this is necessary to create the Eurasian security architecture. Golos Otechestv, the voice of Fatherland, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zaharo. We have one question related to the migrants from the former Soviet Union republics. There is very aggressive rhetoric against these migrants. Excuse me, I have a question. When you're speaking about people coming from the former Soviet Union, you're also speaking about me because in my passport it is stated that I was born in the Soviet Union. No, we think that they are our compatriots because they protected our motherland. You yourself, call yourself someone coming from the Soviet Union. Yes, of course, without any doubt. Well, I think we should be more respectful. We should not segregate people, because everyone who was born before the dismantlement of the Soviet Union are those who come from the Soviet Union. We continue, we are the country that continues the cause of the Soviet Union. Every other country can have other principles, but we all were born in the Soviet Union. So let us be more respectful in our rhetoric, which would be useful to find solution for find answers to all the questions you're going to speak about. Thank you for your comment, because this is our question. These are our compatriots, in fact. We have great past, great fatherland that they were protecting, and now very aggressive rhetoric is being used against them. At the same time, on in their native countries, they are suffering because of the propaganda of the Western media that makes them feeling some bad feelings against the Russians. Can we somehow influence the position of the media? And you have already spoken about your position already. Are you speaking about the mechanism to influence the media? I don't know anything about such mechanisms. We have a law about the media. Maybe this is a mechanism of influence. There is legislation that regulates information activity. We're speaking about speakers and of the government organs and the media. We have the concept of the policy and the plan of its implementation. So many things are stated in our national legislation. We have doctrinal documents, and this should create this favorable space that you are speaking about. If we're speaking about provocations against people that would impede them, this would create opportunities for people. It would create opportunities for respectful treatment of people. Thank you. If there are no questions more, then I'll see you next time. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.